The wheels are starting to come off of China's bid to be the global leader. Their immoral and unethical practices are catching up to them as companies and countries start to decouple and distance themselves from China. But are we too late? Have we gone so far that there is no getting away from China? We'll look at this in this episode of Analysis Behind the News, where we provide the perspective that you can use to restore American liberty and independence. Reports out just in the last couple of weeks have placed a negative spotlight on China and its communist leaders' action during the COVID-19 outbreak. First, the AP reported that U.S. officials believe China covered up the extent of the coronavirus outbreak and how contagious the disease is to stock up on medical supplies needed to respond to it, intelligence documents show. And the analysis comes from the Department of Homeland Security. Again, according to the Associated Press, the DHS analysis states that while downplaying the severity of the coronavirus, China increased imports and decreased exports of medical supplies. It attempted to cover up doing so by denying that there were export restrictions and obfuscating and delaying provision of its trade data. The report also says China held off informing the World Health Organization that the coronavirus was a contagion for much of January so it could order medical supplies from abroad, and that its imports of face masks and surgical gowns and gloves increased sharply. So, for as much as China wants to be a globalist leader when the chips are down, the country's leaders can be counted upon to lie and obfuscate. But you know what? It gets much worse. Last week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told reporters that enormous evidence exists that the Wuhan virus came from the infectious research laboratory in Wuhan. Chinese officials denied it, and a few days later, Pompeo claimed, well, we don't have certainty. Yet, according to an online article from thenewamerican.com, author and Chinese expert Gordon Chang thinks that the virus did come from the lab in Wuhan and speculated that it was probably released on purpose. The article cites another source that states the lab did not pass a U.S. inspection in 2018 and American authorities were fearful that an accidental pathogen release could occur there. The New American wrote, Chang points out that China is not our friend and that we need to economically distance ourselves from it as we socially distance ourselves from each other. We must stop doing business with Beijing, especially in critical areas such as pharmaceuticals and military hardware, asserts Chang, and we should cease treating the nation favorably. Not surprisingly, this is a widespread sentiment and Beijing knows it. Reuters published an article mentioning that an internal Chinese report warns that Beijing faces a rising wave of hostility in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak that could tip relations with the United States into confrontation. The report, presented early last month by the Ministry of State Security to top Beijing leaders, including President Xi Jinping, concluded that global anti-China sentiment is at its highest since the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown, the sources said. As a result, Beijing faces a wave of anti-China sentiment led by the United States in the aftermath of the pandemic and needs to be prepared in a worst-case scenario for armed confrontation between the two global powers, according to people familiar with the report's content who declined to be identified given the sensitivity of the matter. As revealed decades ago, the United States government was responsible for aiding Chinese communists in the 1940s and the 1950s to take over nationalist China. We helped make China into the superpower that it is today, but its power is largely based upon the premise of immoral and unethical business practices. That house of cards will only last as long as its trading partners are willing to put up with it. As we have discussed in prior videos, manufacturing supply chains have started to shift away from China because of the supply interruptions and the threats China has leveled at its trading partners during the Wuhan virus pandemic. The Epoch Times published an interview with Steve Bannon in which he states the Chinese Communist Party will be stripped of its assets, and a Nuremberg-type trial will take place in Wuhan for the biological Chernobyl they released on its citizens and the world. To add insult to injury, the Chinese government is even seizing upon the economic downturn to go on a buying spree. Representative Mark Green from Tennessee told the Epoch Times, right now they are on a buying spree across the globe for companies with a significant national security implication. And as the Epoch Times pointed out, even the head of NATO warned of the Chinese investing in critical industries and infrastructure at this time. Representative Green has had enough, and according to the article, is set to introduce a bill to help companies move their manufacturing from China to the United States as momentum builds for the country to decouple from the Chinese regime. The Epoch Times reports that the bill would allow firms to deduct the entire cost of capital spending associated with relocating from China, known as immediate expensing, to lure companies to move to the United States. The bill would pay for this with money collected from U.S. tariffs on Chinese imports. Now, tariffs are exactly the tool that the founders used to help fund a federal government, while at the same time allowing the tool to punish or reward trading partners depending on their performance. It's about time Congress starts to make better use of this tool instead of capitulating American sovereignty through free trade agreements, which wipes out that tool for all trading partners. So we ask you to please contact Congress today in support of bringing back American manufacturing. Now is the perfect time to do so. Links are in the description, or head to jbs.org/COVID-19. That's COVID-19 without a hyphen. Then, while you're there, apply for membership in the John Birch Society to get involved in our national program that works to protect and restore American freedom, liberty, and independence. Let's make freedom the cure. I'm Bill Hahn for the John Birch Society, and until next time, stay informed, stay active, and stay safe, Patriots.